My name is Michael Rainville. I'm your host on Mirror on the Metro tonight. And recently, Mirror on the Metro had a chance to go over to St. Paul and visit with Captain Bill Bowell on one of his riverboats on Harriet Island. So please, stay tuned and you'll find the fascinating story of Captain Bill Bowell and the Jonathan Padelford Packet Company. To quote from Paul Verrett, who was the president emeritus of the St. Paul Foundation, Bill Bowell returned to St. Paul from World War II to get a college education, raise a family, make a fortune in printing and plastics, and build a successful riverboat excursion company is a riveting tale in itself. That he also beat the odds as a child of the Depression doubles the intrigue. His life story is a model of how he and others of the greatest generation shaped this country. Captain Bill Bowell, welcome to Mirror on the Metro.
Glad to be here.
So Captain, tell us a little bit about your life. You're from a very historic pioneer family who came to Minnesota in 1856.
Yeah, well, that was my great-grandfather, Henry J., and he settled in Northfield. And he came from the east. I believe he was drove a team on the Erie Canal. He actually ended up being involved with a lot of horses. His family, the Padelfords, who are here locally, that is, went from the horses to the driving trucks.
And your mother was Leon Padelford Bowell.
Yes, my mother was the Padelford, and of course she married my dad, who was also English. My mother was very, very little Norwegian, but mostly English also.
So, and you grew up in St. Paul during the Depression era. You have some very fond memories of what South St. Paul was like back then.
Oh, yeah. For amusement, we used to hook a cattle truck at the stop sign and ride out into the country where there were some tomatoes and different things growing out of the ground, and we'd help ourselves and then catch the cattle trucks going the other way back to where we started.
So South St. Paul was quite the place back here.
Oh,
very thriving.
It was booming.
Stockyards were full.
Yeah, it was absolutely booming.
And you were on Harriet Island today filming, and when you were a young man, you actually had a business on this island.
Well, my dad had a popcorn stand, and they used to have a pavilion, and we had and you had to go up the steps to get into the dance floor. And we were in a great spot out of the weather underneath the dance floor, where we operated this popcorn machine. Actually, we had a rig that I replicated it. It was the first popper where you put the oil in and mixed it with the corn.
And when you were just a young man of 12 years old, you and your brother, who was, I believe, 14 at the time, you wanted to go to Chicago to see the World's Fair.
Yeah, it was, well, I think there was two fairs. One was in 33 and the other one was in 34. It's my memory. I'm only 88 years old. but my long-term memory is pretty good. Bob says, "You want to go to the World's Fair in Chicago?" And I said, "Sure." And next thing I know, we're out on Highway 12, thumbing a ride, and I think we had $1.50 in our pocket. My brother Bob matured very early. I didn't, but I got him on the other end. The first night we were in Hudson, Wisconsin, and the second night we were in the Dells, and we found a sleeping place in a teepee, but it got cold at night, and we searched around and found a car that was open and slept in the car. It was much warmer.
So it took you about 3 days to hitchhike to Chicago when you were 12 years old?
Yeah, but we enjoyed every bit of it.
And then in the late 30s, you joined the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC.
Well, that was one of the really great things that Roosevelt ever did. All these kids that were penniless were taken off the streets and given jobs planting trees and in grubbing and stuff like that. It was very hard work. For instance, they gave you a heavy crowbar, and you took the crowbar and stuck it in the ground and wiggled it, and then you planted a tree. And I was not acclimated to any kind of labor like that.
And you also picked up some skills on radio operation and Morse code in the CCC.
Yeah, that was, I learned typing. Typing has been with me all my life, touch typing. I learned the radio code and how to operate radios, which followed me all through my life.
Because then you went into the National Guard after that.
Then I went in the National Guard, and we had World War I equipment, and sometimes it would be hard to transmit across a gymnasium.
It was that bad.
It was that bad.
Well, that prepared you then to really join the Army. You, the day that Pearl Harbor happened, you were having to be out squirrel hunting, weren't you?
I was squirrel hunting, and I made one of the greatest shots I ever made in my life. And I think it was a single shot 22, and a squirrel was jumping from one tree to the other, and I hit him in the mid-flight, and which is pretty hard to do. But anyhow, on the way home, I stopped in a little store to get a rainbow pie. We love those nickel pies, and they were broadcasting about Pearl Harbor, and I wonder where the devil Pearl Harbor was and why are they making such a big fuss about it. Well, I learned shortly after because I had to join the Army as a result.
And not only did you join the Army, but you actually volunteered for the paratroop division.
Well, yeah, I went to California, Camp Roberts. We had just about completed our basic training. I think it was 13 weeks. This officer came around wanting to get volunteers for the paratroops. Well, you got $50 more a month for one thing. It looked good to me, and the lieutenant asked me, now, why would you want to join the paratroop? And with the immaturity of youth, I said, I want to come back with a lot of medals, or I don't want to come back. Foolish thing to say. Well, I got into the paratroops.
And so you had your basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia.
All of us at that time were cadre. In other words, we were the very earliest paratroopers. And my class number was 32. And they're into thousands now.
In the book that you wrote about yourself with a little bit of help, you talked about the mascot that your 507th Parachute Infantry Division had, a dog named Geronimo.
Yeah, Geronimo was a police dog. A friend by the name of Williams was the one that was the owner of the dog. But I become sort of the second nurse to the dog. And whenever Williams was busy with something else, I'd take care of the dog, and we became very friendly. And he ended up making 16 jumps.
So the dog would parachute along with the...
The dog would parachute along with us. But now he's becoming very famous. He made 16 jumps, and he made $16 million for the selling bonds.
Oh. So you became a paratrooper, and you found yourself in Ireland being trained for the big Normandy invasion.
Yeah, that was, we spent about 6 months in Portrush, Ireland. That's Northern Ireland. And that was interesting. And then gradually, I think at the time, they didn't have room anyplace else. After the 6 months, we got shipped back over to Nottingham, England. And we stayed there for a while until the invasion.
So the night of the invasion, you got on a C-47 transport in the dark, and you flew across to Normandy.
It's hard to explain. As I mentioned, the Minnesota Historical Society right now is duplicating the run from England to Normandy. You go in and sit in an airplane, the same airplane, C-47, and it's anybody that's interested wants to see that.
And your voice is part of the narration, isn't it?
My voice is part of the narration.
So you landed behind the lines, and in fact, on your way out the airplane, one of the soldiers in front of you fell down and stopped everybody from jumping.
The seventh guy in the stick. Here we're all trying to get out. Well, this is before the Minnesota mining tape came out, and the floors, we'd all had blankets because we were up there for a couple hours, and it was cold, and they stood up the hookup, and all the blankets fell on the floor, the shiny floor of the airplane, and the seventh guy slipped and fell, and actually our load was so heavy they had to help us boost it in order to get into the airplane.
So, Captain, you were in the airplane, and when you finally did get a chance to jump, you hit the ground very rapidly.
I figured I'd be allowed at 150 feet. I couldn't have counted to 3. It was that close.
And when you landed on the ground, you tried to cut yourself through out of your parachute with the bayonet?
All you're thinking about is a German going to stick it with a bayonet. So, and the thing you got to do is you got to get out of your chute. And the easiest way is to cut out. Well, I pulled my knife out. I'd spent 2 weeks sharpening it, and it was sharp as a razor blade. And I dropped the knife, and without thinking, I picked it up with a blade, and I'm trying to cut myself out with the handle until I felt the blood trickling and corrected it. And I got out, and I didn't get far when I saw somebody creeping towards me. And I gave the password, and which was thunder answered by lightning, and it was one of our guys. And
you found yourself 10 miles behind enemy lines. You hit the wrong drop zone.
I was on the wrong side of the Douve River. See, the airplane got shot down, and so we weren't where we were supposed to be. And it took us a while to find out. I went up to, in the early morning, I went up to a farmhouse. I've now got 3 other guys with me, and they're covering me, and I'm knocking on this door, and somebody pops a window up above, and a Frenchman in a nightcap, wearing a nightcap, and he came down from upstairs and pointed on the map where we were. So we knew what we had to do. We kept going until we hit the Douve River, and we had to go 10 miles beyond the Douve River to Amfreville, where we were going.
And all the while you can hear the Battle of Normandy going on around you.
Well, I don't remember that boom, boom, boom. But I'll tell you one thing. I told the lieutenant I was with. I don't know where he came from or what outfit he was in, but he was as nervous as a cat. And I said, well, I'm going up to that farmhouse and get something to eat. And he said, don't do it. And I said, why? And he said, well, don't do it. And I said, well, I'm going.
You were hungry.
Yeah. And he said, if we ever get back, I'll court-martial you. Well, later he got killed, so that's where my court-martial went. But I went out to this, creeping up on this farmhouse, a big farmhouse. Been in the family for years. And I heard a noise behind me. I swung around, and it was a little old lady coming in from the outhouse. This is about 6 o'clock in the morning. And I said, Ami Americano. She said, hey, she screamed. Just as happy as could be that we'd finally come. And she told me to come on in, and I went into the kitchen, and she hollered something, and the kitchen filled with people. All the family. I mean, it was loaded. And then I started to worry about, here I am standing here, and if anybody tried to grab my gun, I don't know what I would have done. But it turned out that they hit us overnight in their barn, and the Germans were going by in their vehicles right out front of the barn. And if they had got caught, they would have been shot.
And over the years, you kept a relationship up with those
I have kept up that relationship after all these years.
So you formed up with about 45 other members of different paratroop companies and started fighting your way back to the lines.
They took us in the middle of the night, about 5 miles, to a spot where there were about 40 other troopers, 41 to be exact. And then one of the kids would row us across the river, 4 men in the boat at a time. Now, not far away from us are the Germans in entrenchments. So we have to do this surreptitiously, which we did. And I got across on the first night, and all the people on the other side were as friendly as the people on this. And so once we all got across, we formed a block. Like you take 1 acre and put people across all 4 sides, and we moved forward, and we'd blown up an ammunition truck, and all their equipment was horse-drawn, which we couldn't believe, and we blew up a payroll wagon, and remember one guy he's going around, he's filling his Mazette bag with all this money, and I'm a stupid kid. Said it won't be any good. He ended up trading it in for about $5,000 when he got back to England.
So it wasn't German money; it was francs.
Francs.
Yeah. And then you got you fought your way back to the lines and rejoined, and then you came back and fought the Germans during the Battle of Normandy.
Right.
In one particular battle, you were actually recommended for a Silver Star.
Well, I don't know why I never got that, but we're moving forward. I look across a hedgerow. My God, it's all Germans. And somebody hollered, we're being flanked. And we'd moved too fast and gone through the German lines. And I laid down on the hedgerow. And as I talk about it, I'm not that proud of it, but I was a terrific shot about the squirrels. Mm-hmm. Well, it come in handy because I was picking the Germans out one at a time, and I think I got up to number 6, and a shot come over the head, and I put my hand up there. I thought it creased my helmet, and it hadn't. But then they started. I was causing so much havoc that they started dropping mortars on it, and the mortars were exploding in the orchard behind the house, in the trees, so they weren't hurting me.
So then you eventually went back to England and retrained and rested, and then you became involved in the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh yeah, that was something else.
You worked fought under General George Patton.
Yeah, in fact, we led Patton's troops when they got to Bastogne, to free Bastogne. We were ahead of them. Usually that's what they did. The tanks had infantry ahead of them.
In front. So you got out of the war, and you came back here in 1948, started working for the Minnesota Historical Society.
Yeah, well, I graduated from McAllister. Then my first job was a curator of the graphic arts for the Minnesota Historical Society. I set up that department.
And while you're at McAllister, you bought your first boat, the Toka?
Yeah, the Toka. Oh, that was well, actually, when I went back, I did some postgraduate work. I left the Historical Society, and so I went back and changed my major to journalism. And at that time, I refurbished the Toka. It was a 26-foot steel craft into a small passenger boat, and that was 1951. So that's when my excursion boat vision started.
And how much had Heriot Island changed from when you had your popcorn wagon? Was it still the same, or was it starting to change?
Heriot Island, the pavilion was gone. A Wigington building was built, and which is a pretty impressive structure. The roads were dirty. The parking lot was not even gravel, just dirt, and it was a horrible mess. And now in the last couple of years, and Paul Verrett has had a lot to do with it financially. You can't believe the beauty of this island now as compared to what it was when I first started.
Mm-hmm. Paul Verrett was very much involved in bringing back the riverfront in St. Paul.
Yeah, he's great at raising the money.
The St. Paul Foundation.
Yeah, the St. Paul Foundation.
And then in 1965, you bought the Thomas F. and converted that into Ugg the Tug.
Oh, the Thomas F. Yeah. Well, oh, gee, that brings me back a memory. Well, the Thomas F. was a derelict, and the yacht club was full of derelicts.
And what's a derelict? Just an old boat?
An old boat that's no good.
Okay.
I bought it for $300, and I hauled it to Stillwater. It had a strange-looking cabin on it. Actually, it had been a Coast Guard boat at one time, which speaks well of it. I took it to my home in Stillwater, and I don't think the neighbors liked it because it looked like a piece of junk. And I took that cabin off and used the hull and built a beautiful boat, Ugg the Tug, that had a terrific reputation of beautiful workmanship. You got to see that boat to understand it, because it was a beautiful boat.
And then in 1969, Captain, you actually started the Padelford Packet Boat Company. You had your first excursion business out of Heriot Island here in St.
Well,
Paul.
I used to, I'd go at night and sit on the bench down in Stillwater where the Muller Boat Works is. And I'm sitting there dreaming, and I thought, well, why don't I build an excursion boat and put it in St. Paul? And the more I got into it, the more I was told I couldn't miss. Not by my inner self, not by anybody else. Everybody else thought I was nuts. And I mean, they thought I was nuts. Bob Klaus, who was well known in the area, he owns a tape mark company. He tells a story of coming home that night and telling his wife, you know what that Bill Bowell is doing? He's nuts. He's going to build an excursion boat to run on the river down there. And look what happened.
And that led to the start of a big fleet. You bought the Zebulon Pike in 1972. You later added the Josiah Snelling.
Well, there's so many there that my memory doesn't reach that far back.
What was it like being a river captain? You must have to be pretty tough to run a ship down on the river.
Well, I always felt you had to be tough, and I was, and I developed a reputation of being a SOB. It all came out in the wash.
Did you remember the night you had a bunch of college students on the boat and they were misbehaving and you had to convince them using your gun?
Yeah, they were ready to start the fight, and I walked down there, and I kept a 38 in the pilot house. And I walked down there and stepped right between them. And I says, the first one of you that move, I'm going to cold cock. And they didn't move.
So, and then Captain, I would imagine that being on the river, you run into your fair share of bad weather.
Oh yeah.
Boats are very susceptible to the weather change.
I was, you know what my weather station was? I'd go up on the bluff. All it was, the weather comes from the west, and I could see for a long distance and conjecture whether we were going to make the trip or not, which worked out pretty well.
A lot of floods on the river. You've probably witnessed many floods in your day.
Oh yeah, but they were all exciting. I had a small boat with I think it was about a 25 horsepower engine. I used to clean debris, and I can remember floods where I had to ferry the crew from the shore out to the boat. for 100 yards or so.
What year, do you remember when the flood and you still want to run your excursion boats, but the fire chief wouldn't let you run them?
What did I tell him? I'd open for business, in the hell with the fire chief. I had a sign made.
The fire chief got a little mad at you.
Yeah, he did, but we became friends when he found out who he was dealing with.
Perhaps one of your greatest legacies is your involvement with the River Museum in Dubuque, Iowa, the National Mississippi River.
Yeah.
That's where your collection is.
Yeah, in fact, the reason I picked that museum is totally river orientated. What it involved is I had 2,700 books, all pertaining to the river somehow. Different rivers, mostly American rivers. Then I commissioned 90 paintings, all pertaining to the people that are in the River Hall of Fame and other historical characters. So that's a big collection, and that's where the Padelford was built by Dubuque Boiler Company.
You know, Captain, one of your legacies will also be the Minnesota Showboat. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your involvement with that and bringing that into Harriet Island?
Well, one evening, leaving the dock up there, and I see smoke pouring down by Newport. I find out the next day the showboat had burned up. The old General Newton, that was 1899, built by Dubuque Boat and Boiler, had burned up. A few months later, there were rumors that the university could not build another boat because they were getting bids that were in somewhere around $4 million. And I think it was Mayor Coleman that approached me and asked me if there was anything I could do. He and I have always got along real well. I had calculated that the boat would run $2 million, and I knew that we might go over that. But how much over, I didn't realize it at the time. I called a meeting, and they were all negative. 15 minutes later, I called an end to the meeting and called Stephen into the boardroom. He was the only one that hadn't opened his mouth and was negative. And I knew he was positive all the time anyhow. And I said, Stephen, you and I are going to build that boat for the university. So we presented the deal to the university, and everybody got behind the whole project. I mean, from the top dog down. My concept was, we'll build the boat and sell it to you. The boat went $300,000 over, but I expected that it would. But we got a contract that we take care of the boat and do all the management and can use the boat when the university isn't use it for dinners and stuff like that.
Well, Captain, thanks so much for your time today and talking to us here on Metro Cable 6. You've had a fascinating life, and you still got a lot of fire left in you, and we're very grateful that you shared your story with us.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to show it.